One of the highlights of this year's Melbourne Documentary Film Festival in July is a film called The Burnt Half about the devastating bushfires that happened on Kangaroo Island in South Australia. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of The Burnt Half, Stephen de Villiers. Stephen, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Good to talk to you. And this is such an incredible documentary about the devastation that occurred on Kangaroo Island in 2020, where half the island was devastated and the other half was pretty much left alone. Tell me about the origins of making this documentary.
Certainly. Look, it all goes back to those early days in January 2020 when the island was literally on fire. I went over actually for a job, and we were following some of the sort of first responders around and documenting their work in terms of getting utilities both offline and back online. And it was actually an incredibly moving couple of days, more so than I actually expected. I mean, I grew up in Africa and I thought I'd seen a lot and done a lot, but it was incredibly powerful, just the experience of just seeing the scope and the scale of quite profound devastation. Even you see it on the news and you think that looks shocking, but to walk through the ashes and to see mobs of kangaroos turned into cinders, you name it. Anyway, it was incredibly, left a strong impression. So much so that as we were kind of driving off the island, off the ferry, it was sunset. We were all quite moved, my crew and I just said, I think we need to go back. There were lots of news cameras around us as well. But, being more of a narrative-driven documentary filmmaker, I thought this is going to come and go. It'll be yesterday's news quickly, but these people are going to be going through something profound for the next couple of years. So we just decided that we were going to come back as quick as we could. So I cleared the calendar and we were back and with cameras again, literally 7 days later. Not really sure what our story was just yet. We went over, I spent a couple of days kind of getting leads and trying to sort of find what I felt instinctively the story would be. But that was kind of, in a way, the exciting part of it was it felt like we were venturing into unknown narrative territory, because I just had a strong instinct that there was a bigger story to be told. My initial instincts were that it would be around recovery and rebuild. But we found out a lot of different things when we ended up on the island.
Well, it is incredible. And the stories that were told are really quite remarkable. And finding these people and getting them to talk to camera must have been really interesting.
Look, it was. And you're absolutely right that when one goes into a context like that, one definitely needs, I definitely wanted to deal with it with a degree of sensitivity, as you obviously have to. It felt strange bringing a camera into these people's homes, lives, sphere of influences when they'd just been through so much. But by the same token, we were lucky in that I think we were able to win their trust. And that was quite important to me, to do that and to sort of demonstrate that we weren't just there to sensationalize anything. We weren't there, and they were kind of a little bit camera shy because they'd had news cameras in their faces for a few weeks already. And I think they were a little bit tired of that and, wanted to just get on with trying to make sense of what was going on. So we were kind of there as the news cameras were all leaving. We were still there hanging around, and it being a very close-knit, tight-knit community, when we won favor with a couple of key individuals, that very quickly got us access to other individuals, because they all, it's a very tiny, in a way, tight-knit community, especially on the deep west end of the island, which was what was most affected. So we were just able to, I guess, follow the story, and people would say things like, you should really speak to so-and-so, and then here's the number. And we just were grateful for that. And I think we demonstrated that we were trying to tell the story with integrity and accuracy. And so it unfolded.
Wow. And so did you have a small camera crew, sound recorders and so on? How did all that work?
Yeah, very much a light footprint, both strategically and as in terms of not overwhelming it, but also just practically that's what we were doing. We were there on our own volition, and we didn't it was way too quick to try and secure any, development funding and so on. But it was just myself, my cinematographer, and an assistant or a sound recordist. So pretty much three of us for all of the trips we went back for.
Yeah, and this was also during the time of COVID, of course.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So COVID was beginning globally, but obviously it kind of, and that was quite bizarre as well. We just had fires. We were there following these stories, and then we were stuck on the island as well. And meanwhile, we were literally looking at the news, and China was locking down. We were just going, what is this? What's going on? The world's gone crazy. Little did we know how crazy it was going to get. But yeah, so that it's interesting you go there, because that then became obviously a moment in the story, but it also limited our ability to go back when travel bans obviously went into place. So this was all just on the eve of COVID, if you will, when we managed to film the majority of the film. And then we obviously managed to go back after restrictions were lifted, which kind of tied in nicely, because we wanted to have a number of strategic visitations to sort of see how people were getting on and kind of keep the story going, knowing that they would all be entering different stages and phases of both emotional and physical recovery. But I guess, yeah, COVID certainly limited our ability to visit at one of the kind of milestones I wanted to, which would have been, I think, the 12 months, but we got there 14 months on. So that was when restrictions lifted.
Okay. Were there any challenges in filming some of the areas? Because I can imagine with the fire perhaps still burning or almost completed, that filming might have had some challenges.
The roads were pretty much mostly open by the time we went back to do the main body of our filming. When I was there, as I say, on that very first initial sort of visitation, that was very much roads were still blocked. People were still clearing, emergency services, the army. It was all hands on deck. It was incredibly humbling to see how both the community was galvanized and I think the support that the island received in that first knee-jerk kind of response. But the army was incredible to witness. They just got in and rolled up their sleeves and did stuff that I think there's a line in the film where one of the farmers in this instance who we were speaking to sort of said it would have taken me months to do what they did in a day. So that was quite profound to see. But to answer your question, apologies, we didn't really have too much. The biggest part of, actually, you're right, the Flinders Chase National Park was closed, and that was very much the epicenter. So we desperately did want to get in there, but that was a no-go zone for a while. But I managed to sort of, dare I say it, talk my way into one of the rangers opening up for us before anyone else got in. So our cameras were some of the first ever to film what happened in Flinders Chase. They then did a big news day where a lot of people went through, but I managed to get in early, and we spent an afternoon with one of the rangers, or with one of the national parks employees, if you will, and he took us around, and it was absolutely surreal because it's a huge park, and there was no one in it, and we were just walking through what looked like a war zone. It was quite something.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's incredible to think that it only affected half the island, and the other half was scot-free. That's incredible.
Look, it is, and had they look, I mean, it's dramatic in that half the island was literally devastated, and you're right, the other half is just still pristine. And there's a couple of fascinating things on that. One is, being an island, my suspicion and my instinct is that the effect on people, not to suggest what happened in places like New South Wales was any different, it was all absolutely catastrophic, but there's something psychological about being stranded. They're literally trapped. There is nowhere to go, and they were aware of this, acutely aware of this. So back against the wall, had the wind not slowed down, been a cool change, the whole island very likely could have gone. So I think that played into the psyche of the community dramatically. But I guess to tease a theme of the film as well that we tried to explore was, there's a sense of, there was something called survivor's guilt that crept in, which I was very attuned to, and I sort of was sensing this because it was very much the haves and the have-nots, and those that were burnt out and those that weren't. And in many ways, the emotional toil on those who weren't burnt out was quite profound, because there's a sense of guilt, and there's a sense of how do we just get away with this when our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, are literally our fellow islanders have lost everything. But so to witness them rally, but to then also witness people grappling with the nuanced emotions that come with both losing everything and not losing everything, but being part of a community, was a very interesting psychological through line that I tried to kind of weave into the film.
Yes, no, it's certainly there, and incredible story. So tell me about the editing process, because with some great footage and interviews and so on, it must have been quite a task to put it all together.
Look, absolutely right. And like I hinted at earlier, this is completely an independent film. We literally just rolled up our sleeves and got on with it. I took it to market. We looked at getting it pre-sold in the early days, but the timing's tricky with a film. Like catastrophic films, I think, go through a zeitgeist. They're either too soon or too late, but I'm trusting that our film has now a universal resonance. And, just listening to the news this morning, Canada is on fire as we speak. So I knew this was a global challenge, and I hoped our film would become a sort of a symbolic representation of that had resonance globally. But I guess, to get to your point, because we self-financed it, it kind of had to fit in and around the work that kept the lights on and, fed the families. So it was a bit of a stop-start process. And of course, COVID hit when we were right into our post-production. So even for us, we kind of had to go, what does that mean? We need to sort of just make sense of this all. So it did unfortunately take a bit of a back burner, and we were still filming. So it was a necessary thing. But it hit a point where we just committed, and we just said, no, we're going to just down tools on all the paid work. And the whole team pretty much just sunk our teeth into it. And in about 6 weeks, we managed to really just find the shape of the film. And then it was just a sprint to the finish line. But yes, we had, absolute terabytes of footage and excellent stories. That said, we were quite efficient, because pretty much every story we filmed made the film. We didn't kind of shoot blindly, overshoot, and that was both a necessary thing and a kind of, I think our narrative instincts were quite attuned to the story we were trying to tell. But my editor, and documentaries are very much an editor's medium. I think editors don't get enough credit and acclaim for the hard work they do. But we just collaborated, and I just kind of went, I think this is it. This is the ending. Let's work backwards. And I left him alone, and he just found the gold and really brought his own sort of narrative instincts to it. And in about 6 weeks, we had a film that we were all very proud of. And then it was just the finishing touches, which is the fun part, the color grade, the sound mix, the score, working with the composer obviously was another whole experience. But I think this film sounds beautiful. So yeah.
Yeah, oh, excellent. I was going to commend the music score. It really fits in nicely in the film. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we tried to make a film that was, I'm a dramatic director first and foremost. Like, I'm a writer director, and ironically, drama is where I felt proved to me that documentary, which I've always praised and admired, so much so that I didn't feel particular. I had a bit of an imposter syndrome trying to make documentaries, but it was validating to make this. And at the end of the day, telling a good story is telling a good story. And I think I'm a screen storyteller, so we just brought our narrative sort of impressions and instincts to it. But I suppose where I was going with that is, we definitely wanted to make something that was more cinematic, that was more lyrical, that was evocative, as opposed to sort of talking heads and dramatic, just a slightly more literal storytelling experience. I really wanted to give the viewer an evocative sense of the space, the scope, the feelings that we felt when we were on the ground. And I hope that comes through to a degree.
Yep, it certainly does. So tell me, have the people who were part of your film seen the final version of the film, and how are they now?
Great question. The short answer is no, not everyone has. We haven't been back to the island. It's a delicate thing, because in many ways, I'm not yet 100% sure how the island will react. On one level, I think there's a part of them that want to put it to bed. My hope and my prayer is that they will go, thank you for telling our story and capturing our moment in time, and you did it justice. But because there's so many disparaging points of view, even within the film, and I think that comes through, I'm very conscious, and I still am, of not reigniting debate, because there's people on the island who still have and they're human beings. They've got differences of opinion. They always will. That said, they're a strong community. So I am cautiously optimistic that they will embrace the film. I hope we've done the film and their story justice and dealt with it with sensitivity and integrity. That's my strong hope and prayer. But they will be the judge. And that said, I have shown some of the people that we formed relationships with, because I wanted to get, before we finished the film, I connected with one of the people who are in the film, who I just had a strong relationship with. And I said, look, I'm going to show you where it's at. I need to know that you think this is going in the right direction. We're not angering anyone. We're not being disingenuous. And he, and conscious of emotional triggers. I mean, mental health challenges are profound off the back of an experience like this. And so it turns out it's 2, 3, 4 years after the event, after the fences are rebuilt, after the stocks are replenished, that I think people stop and take, and take note of what they're feeling. And that came out in the news only a few months ago, and I read an article about the island and how now is when mental health is a real concern. So I'm conscious of triggering anything. I hope that it is dealt with sensitively enough. But the one individual we did show, he got quite emotional, but he said, thank you. You've told this story, and he was, he was happy, and that gave me enough confidence to keep doing what we were doing. And I'm looking forward to getting back. It's a timing thing now. It's all just been a rush to get ready for Melbourne, and I think it's a beautiful opportunity to have our premiere there. We're coming over. I can't wait. And then I definitely will be looking forward to taking the film to the island and arranging some kind of screening.
Oh, look, that's excellent. And I suppose your film also serves politically in a way that it improves the services, emergency services, and other things that that happen on the island.
Look, I hope so too. There are some controversies, obviously. There were, without giving away too much, I suppose what we discovered when we started filming was this kind of ruminating anger, and I kind of was curious. I mean, I suspected that people would be angry at the hand fate dealt them, but there was an instinct for some to lay blame at organization, at bureaucracy, you name it, for the way things were handled. And I think it's always important that filmmakers and storytellers and whoever else hold up a mirror to society and go, how are we doing? Can we do better? And I hope the film achieves that. I mean, in a way, there were royal commissions, there were a number of inquests and inquiries that did validate the premise of our film. And I hope that the film gets people talking. I genuinely do. I think there's the truth and the truth. It's somewhere in the middle. But indeed, I think I hope we do shine a light on some of the controversies that were raised and flagged. I hope we just reflect back what we heard with fairness. But I suspect that, yes, this will spark some conversations, which I think is great, because people have an instinct to lay blame at things, at the climate, you name it, and that's understandable. who's right? Who knows? I think one of our characters sums it up quite nicely in the film, where he says, fingers will be pointed, but we did the best that we could on the day. And you can't really fault that. I genuinely believe that's true. However, it's important to take stock. It's important to audit. It's important to go, because this probably isn't going away. This probably isn't the last fire. Kangaroo Island we'll see, certainly not Australia we'll see. As I say, they're happening in Canada right now. So how do we deal with these? It's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I just want to ask you, Stephen, your background as a filmmaker, what other films have you made?
Oh, okay. Look, how long have you got? But also, I wish it was a long story. No, I made my first film 20 years ago. I've made a number of short films that have done very well in terms of, the festival market and awards and what have you. I made another documentary a couple of years ago, which is also very close to my heart. Beautiful documentary. It's on actually screening in England and in America as we speak, and it looks like it'll get another run on SBS later in the year. That's a historical biopic. Basically, there was a project that was brought to us, and I was put on as a director. It's about a gentleman called Bob Quinn, who was the captain of the Port Adelaide Football Club back in the 1940s. So we kind of told the story of his life. He was also a decorated war hero. So that was a great film that did quite well. It was on Channel 7, and then it got picked up by a number of broadcasters overseas because I think it had that kind of dual interest sports history lens, which is a strong audience draw card. And then I made a film that's also very close to my heart, a documentary as well, basically about Indigenous youth incarceration. And again, that was a project that was brought to us in a very, very rich topic that I hope we dealt with quite carefully, and only the tip of an iceberg. We could and probably will tell a much bigger story there. And then I have made, as I say, about half a dozen dramatic narrative short films. And I'm on the cusp of my first feature, which is quite exciting. We're sort of closing our finance, and that'll be a big project over the next 12 months.
Oh, what a rich history of filmmaking. How interesting. What were the titles of those two documentaries you mentioned?
Sure. So the one on Aboriginal or Indigenous youth incarceration is called Stuck in Time. That was a commission by SBS and NITV, actually, which I was privileged to be offered the opportunity to direct. And then the story of Bob Quinn is called The Rover of Tobruk, because he was in the siege of Tobruk, and his position was as a rover. So he was a desert rat, and he led the Australians to Tobruk in his division at least. And then some beautiful stories in that one as well. We interviewed his son, obviously, who was told his dad's story very well. Bob Quinn obviously is, he passed away a number of years ago. And then a couple of legends from the club, the Port Adelaide Football Club as well. So it was brilliant.
Okay, what interesting titles and stories. So well done on all that. Now, The Burnt Half is screening in July, as you mentioned, as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. How else will The Burnt Half be screened?
Sure. So we've been approached by SBS as well. I think it's a good fit for SBS. I think it's the right sort of film for them. So that's a great place to have it land. So SBS is likely to acquire, or is going to acquire it later in the year. I think we've sort of scheduled it because we wanted to have a bit of a festival run beforehand. So I think Chloe, my producer, will know better than me, but it's about October, November that it'll be available on SBS for people to watch, which is very exciting. In addition to that, we hope to get a few more festivals, because that's obviously always nice to do. And then we're still looking at possible international sales deals that will hopefully get it, screening around the world. And I think tragically, in light of the kind of the Northern Hemisphere summer that we're having, there may be an interest again to examine how the Southern Hemisphere has undergone and dealt with similar catastrophes.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. No, hopefully it will be screened very widely. It deserves to. Look, it's been a
Appreciate
pleasure
that.
talking to you, Stephen. We've been speaking to Stephen de Villiers, who's the director of The Burnt Half, screening as part of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival in July. Stephen, thanks so much for talking with me.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for reaching out. Talk soon.
Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.
See ya.